Some moments in life, they creep into your soul and never leave. No matter how much time passes, no matter how many times you tell yourself it wasn't what it seemed, or it didn't mean anything. It's been 2 years. 2 years since that night. 2 years since I made a choice I can't erase. A choice that lingers in my mind like a stain that refuses to wash away. I tell myself I'm not a bad person. I was just lonely. Just tired. Just human. But tell me something. Does loneliness justify the things we do when no one's watching? Does a moment of weakness erase years of self-control? Or is it in those moments, the ones we never see coming, that we reveal who we truly are? Because I never planned for this to happen. I never thought I'd feel that way about him. But the moment it happened, the moment I saw the way his eyes widened, the way his breath hitched, I knew nothing would ever be the same. It started with something so simple. An ordinary night. A casual glance. A tiny, insignificant moment that should have meant nothing. But if you've ever felt completely invisible, if you've ever gone years without being touched the way you need to be touched, then you'll understand. You'll understand how something so small can feel like oxygen when you've been suffocating for years. I didn't mean to go that far. I didn't mean for things to get complicated. But once a line is blurred, can it ever be unblurred? Was it a mistake? A temptation? A moment of madness? Or was it something that was always meant to happen? I thought I had control. I thought I knew who I was, what I would never do. But when I saw his face that day, the shock in his eyes, the way his lips parted, the way silence wrapped around us so thick neither of us could move, I knew. I had crossed a line. And there was no going back. Before I tell you the full story, before I lay out every single detail of the night that changed everything, I need to ask you something. Have you ever crossed a line you never thought you would? Something small. Something innocent. Until suddenly, it wasn't? Tell me in the comments. Because if I'm going to confess, I don't want to do it alone. And if you're ready to hear the truth, if you're ready for a story that might just change the way you look at temptation, then make sure to subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga and hit that like button. Because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. I guess to really understand how it all happened, you have to understand me. Who I was before that night. I'm not some reckless woman. I didn't wake up one day and decide to throw my life away. No, it happened slowly. Piece by piece. My name isn't important, but what you need to know is that I'm 38 years old, and I've been married for 15 years. 15 years to a man who, at one point, made my heart race. A man I once believed saw me. His name is Tom. And he used to love me. At least, I think he did. But love has a way of changing, doesn't it? One day you wake up and you're just a habit. A fixture in the house. Someone who does the laundry, cooks the meals, makes sure everything runs smoothly, but never someone who is truly seen. That's what I became. Tom and I, we don't fight. We don't scream at each other. No, it's worse than that. We coexist. We move around each other like ghosts in the same house. We speak, but it's about bills and schedules and things that don't matter. The silence is the worst part. There's nothing lonelier than lying in bed next to someone who stopped choosing you a long time ago. I tell myself it's normal. That this is just marriage. That after so many years, passion fades in this emptiness is just part of life. But deep down, I know better. Because every time Tom walks through the door, I feel my body tense, waiting for something, anything. A touch, a glance, a moment of warmth. But it never comes. I could be wearing my best dress, my hair done, my lips painted red, and he'd barely look up from his phone. I could be crying in the next room, and he wouldn't notice unless it interrupted his work call. I could disappear, and I wonder, would he even feel the absence? I know what you're thinking. Why didn't I leave? Maybe I should have. Maybe if I had, none of this would have happened. But leaving isn't as simple as people make it seem. Love may fade, but attachment remains. And comfort, oh, comfort is a prison you don't even realize you're locked in. And then, there was Nick. Nick is Tom's son from his first marriage. He was only 7 when I came into his life, a quiet but sweet boy who always looked at me like I was someone special. And maybe that's why this hurts so much. Because for the longest time, I saw him as my own. He was never the rebellious type. He grew up fast, too fast, always carrying the weight of things he shouldn't have had to. His mother left when he was barely old enough to understand what abandonment meant. And maybe, in some ways, we were both abandoned. But where I fell into silence, Nick noticed. Even as a child, he would ask me if I was okay, if I needed help. He'd pick up on the sadness I tried so hard to hide. And now, at 19, he's taller, stronger, with a quiet confidence about him. But that kindness? That rare, precious kindness? It never left. Maybe that's why that moment at the dinner table shook me. I remember it so clearly. The way the light from the chandelier cast a soft glow over his face. The way he laughed at something I said, something small, something silly, but it felt like hearing my name for the first time in years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt seen. Tom sat across from us, barely listening, shoveling food into his mouth while scrolling through his phone. I made a joke. Nothing special. Just something light to fill the silence. And Nick? Nick laughed. A real laugh. The kind that comes from deep inside. The kind that makes you feel like you exist. And then he said it. So casually. So innocently. I don't know why Dad never listens to you. You're actually really funny. I froze. Not because of what he said, but because he noticed. He saw it. The neglect. The way Tom treated me like background noise. And that's when it started. That tiny, forbidden spark. That thing you don't want to acknowledge, because acknowledging it means something is wrong. It was nothing, I told myself. Nothing at all. But the way Nick looked at me that night, the warmth in his eyes, the genuine appreciation, lingered in my mind long after the plates were cleared and the lights were turned off. Because for the first time in a long time, someone had made me feel. And that's where everything started to fall apart. It was just another evening. Nothing special. Nothing out of the ordinary. At least, that's what I told myself. Tom was away, working late like always. I was in the kitchen, moving through the motions, chopping, stirring, tasting. Cooking had become muscle memory at this point. A routine I could do with my eyes closed. But that night, something felt different. I don't know why I noticed the silence more than usual. The way the house felt too still. The way the soft hum of the refrigerator seemed louder than it should have been. And then, footsteps. Nick. I heard him before I saw him. The way his steps were unhurried, casual. The way he moved through the house like someone comfortable in his space, but careful not to intrude. He walked into the kitchen, leaning against the doorway, arms crossed. "That smells good," he said. I smiled, just a polite, instinctive smile, and waved the wooden spoon in my hand. "You think? It's missing something. Here, taste it." I scooped a bit of sauce onto the spoon and turned toward him, holding it up. It was nothing. A simple gesture. Something I'd done 100 times before. But this time, the moment his lips touched the spoon, something shifted. He paused, just for a fraction of a second, but I noticed. His brows furrowed slightly as he tasted it, and when his eyes lifted to meet mine, there was something in them. Something uncertain. Something he didn't expect to feel. Or maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was all in my head. But I felt it, too. A heaviness in the air. A weight in my chest I couldn't explain. It was only a second, maybe less, but it stretched between us, thick and unspoken. Then, just like that, it was gone. He cleared his throat, setting the spoon down. "Yeah, it's good." His voice was normal. Maybe a little forced. Maybe a little too casual. Then he turned and left the kitchen. I stood there, holding the spoon, staring at the doorway where he had just been. Why did that moment feel so intense? Why did I suddenly feel like I needed to catch my breath? I shook it off, forced myself to focus. It was nothing, just a passing thought, a trick of my own loneliness. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that fleeting moment over and over again, I knew I was lying to myself. Something had changed, and I wasn't sure I wanted to admit it, but denial only lasts so long. Because the next time I saw him, it happened again. I told myself to forget it. That's what I kept repeating in my head. It was nothing. It didn't mean anything. It was just a normal moment that my mind twisted into something else because I've been lonely for too long. And yet, it stayed with me. The way his expression changed. The way the air around us thickened, pressing in, making my skin tingle with an awareness I didn't want to acknowledge. I carried that moment with me for the rest of the night, like a weight sitting on my chest. I shouldn't have thought about it, but I did. And the worst part? I didn't want to stop thinking about it. I tried to push it away, tried to focus on other things. I busied myself, cleaned the kitchen twice, folded laundry that didn't need folding, anything to quiet the thoughts creeping in. It was nothing. I'm just lonely. I'm reading too much into it. But the more I tried to convince myself, the more I felt like I was lying. Because the truth was, I wanted to feel something again. And that scared me more than anything. That night Tom came home late, as always. I sat on the couch, pretending to watch TV, but really, I was waiting. Waiting for him to say something. Waiting for him to notice me. He walked in, set his bag down, barely glanced in my direction. Long day? I asked, my voice careful, testing. Just that. No real answer. No questions about my day. Nothing. He sat down, pulled out his phone, scrolling through emails, already lost in another world that didn't include me. And I hated how used to it I was. How this had become our normal. So I tried. Tom, do you remember when we used to cook together? He didn't even look up. Huh, cooking. You used to help me in the kitchen. We used to talk while I made dinner. A pause. Barely a flicker of acknowledgement. Yeah, I guess. Then he went right back to his phone. I felt it then, this sharp, twisting loneliness clawing at my ribs. I wanted to shake him. To make him look at me. To make him see that I was drowning in this marriage. But I didn't. Instead, I just sat there, silent, staring at a man who used to be my everything, realizing that he had let go of me a long time ago, and I had been too afraid to admit it. And then there was Nick. I thought about the way he had looked at me earlier, even if just for a moment. The way his eyes had actually seen me. How he had laughed at my joke. How he had actually listened. Not out of obligation. Not because he had to. But because he wanted to. And God, I didn't even realize how much I had been starving for that kind of attention. I told myself it wasn't about him. It wasn't about Nick specifically. It was just about being noticed. Being appreciated. Feeling like a woman again, instead of a piece of furniture in my own home. But even as I tried to justify it, the guilt started creeping in. Because why was I thinking about him so much? Why was I comparing a 19-year-old's kindness to my husband's neglect? And why, deep down, did I find myself wanting another moment like that? A brush of fingers. A lingering look. Something. Anything. I didn't see him the next morning. Tom left early for work, the same routine as always, and I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee, staring at the empty chair across from me. Nick's chair. I wondered if he thought about last night the way I did. If he felt something too. And that thought made my stomach twist. I needed to shake this. Needed to get out of my own head. So I left the house, went grocery shopping, ran errands, anything to distract myself. But nothing worked. Because no matter what I did, I kept replaying that moment. The way his lips had parted slightly after tasting the food. The way he had hesitated before leaving the kitchen. And worst of all, the way I wanted to see him again. Not in the casual, motherly way I had for years. No, in a way I wasn't ready to admit. In a way I knew was dangerous. And yet, as much as I tried to fight it, I already knew. This was only the beginning. And once you start wanting something you know you shouldn't, there's no turning back. I told myself I wouldn't think about it anymore. I told myself it was just a fleeting moment, something that would fade if I ignored it long enough. But the thing about feelings, the kind you're not supposed to have, is that they don't just disappear. They grow. They settle under your skin. And then, before you even realize what's happening, they start to change you. It had been days since that night in the kitchen. Days of pretending everything was normal, of forcing myself to act the way I always had. But something was different now. And I felt it again the moment Nick walked into the kitchen that evening. I was cooking, again, just like last time. The scent of garlic and butter filled the air, warm and familiar. I kept my focus on the pan in front of me, trying to ignore the way my pulse quickened when I heard his voice behind me. "That smells amazing," he said, leaning casually against the counter. I smiled, but I didn't turn around. I couldn't. Not yet. "It's nothing special. Just something quick." "Well, it smells special," he said, and I felt the warmth of his words settle into my chest. It was such a small thing. Just a compliment. But when was the last time someone had said something like that to me? When was the last time Tom had noticed anything I did? I swallowed, forcing my voice to stay light. "I hope it tastes as good as it smells." I felt him watching me, but I didn't dare meet his eyes. And then, he said it. So simple. So offhand. "It's nice having home-cooked meals." I feel like I never get that anymore. A quiet sentence. A passing thought. But it hit me like a wave. Because I knew what he meant. I knew what it felt like to miss something that should be normal. To feel neglected in ways that no one else seemed to notice. My hands tightened around the wooden spoon. "Well," I said softly, "I like cooking for people who appreciate it." And then, just for a second, I let myself look at him. And that's when I saw it. That same hesitation from before. That same flicker of something unreadable in his expression. Something I shouldn't recognize. But I did. Because it was the same way I had been looking at him. That night, after dinner, I stood at the sink, rinsing dishes, letting the warm water run over my hands, trying to steady myself. Tom had already disappeared into his office, like always. Another night of silence. Another night of feeling alone in a house that wasn't empty, but somehow felt like it was. And then, Nick appeared beside me. "Let me help." I almost dropped the plate in my hands. "You don't have to," I said quickly. "I know." But he stayed anyway. I watched as he reached for a dish towel, drying the plates as I handed them to him. It was nothing. A simple act. But my heart was beating too fast, because Tom never did this. Tom never stood beside me, never helped, never even noticed how exhausted I was at the end of the day. But Nick? Nick was here. And that small, quiet moment, standing side by side at the sink, working together in comfortable silence, felt more intimate than anything I had experienced in years. And then it happened. A tiny, accidental thing. Our hands brushed. Barely a touch. Just a fleeting press of skin against skin as I passed him a plate. But it sent a shiver down my spine. I felt it. I knew I felt it. And when I glanced at him, just to see if I was imagining things, his hand was still lingering, just for a second too long. And his breath hitched. A small, sharp intake. Barely audible. But I heard it. I felt it. Did he feel it too? Or was I going crazy? I should have pulled away. I should have stepped back, laughed it off, said something to break the tension. But I didn't. Because for the first time in a long time, I didn't want the moment to end. When it was over, when the last plate was dried and put away, he finally stepped back, rubbing the back of his neck. "Thanks for dinner," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Anytime," I whispered. And then he left. Just like that. Like nothing had happened. But I stood there for a long time, gripping the edge of the counter, staring at my own reflection in the dark window. Breathing too hard. Thinking too much. Feeling too much. This was dangerous. I knew it was dangerous. And yet, the only thing running through my mind, over and over again, was a thought I shouldn't have had. A thought that terrified me. I hope it happens again. Because suddenly I wanted it to. More than anything. And I wasn't sure if I had the strength to stop it. The night it happened, the sky was restless. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and slow, like a warning. The rain had started hours ago, a steady rhythm against the windows, the kind of rain that makes the world feel smaller, more intimate. Tom was gone. Another work trip. Another night where I didn't have to pretend. And then there was Nick. He had just come home from class, his hair damp from the rain, his sweatshirt clinging to his arms. I was curled up on the couch, watching some show I wasn't even paying attention to. Just noise to fill the silence. He walked in, dropped his bag by the door, and without thinking, I said it. Sit with me. I don't know why I said it. It just came out. Maybe because I was lonely. Maybe because the house felt too empty. Or maybe because some part of me wanted him to. He hesitated for a second. Just a second. Then, slowly, he lowered himself onto the couch beside me. Not too close. Not too far. Just there. The screen flickered in front of us, colors shifting in the dim light. The sound of the rain mixed with the low murmur of the television. And for a while, it was normal. Casual. We talked a little. Laughed at something ridiculous on the show. It felt easy, natural, until it didn't. Until I felt his eyes on me. I wasn't supposed to look. I knew I wasn't supposed to. But I did. And the moment I turned my head, the moment our eyes met in the glow of the TV, something changed. He looked away. Quickly. Too quickly. And my heart stuttered. No. This can't happen. This shouldn't happen. But the air between us was different now. Charged. I felt it in my skin, in my breath, in the way my pulse pounded just a little harder than before. I told myself to focus on the TV. To act normal. But then I shifted. Maybe it was unconscious. Maybe it was on purpose. I don't know. All I know is that when I moved just the slightest bit closer, I felt him tense beside me. I could hear his breathing. Could feel the heat of him, too close, too much. And still, neither of us moved. Neither of us said a word. The rain pounded against the glass, the sound of it swallowing the space around us, making everything else feel distant. My fingers twitched against the fabric of the couch. One move. One wrong move, and everything would spiral. I should have stood up. I should have made a joke, broken the tension, done anything to stop what was happening. But I just sat there, my body betraying me, my mind screaming at me to walk away, and then, suddenly, he did. Nick pushed off the couch so fast it startled me. He didn't look at me. Didn't say a word. He just left the room. And the second he was gone, the weight of what had almost happened came crashing down on me. I sat there, frozen, staring at the empty space where he had been just moments ago. The air still felt thick, like the moment hadn't fully dissipated, like it was clinging to the walls, to my skin. My hands were shaking. What was that? What almost happened? I pressed my palms against my face, my breath uneven, my mind racing. It was nothing. It was everything. I told myself he left because he felt nothing. That he got up because it was all in my head. But deep down, I knew the truth. He left because he felt it too. Because if he had stayed, neither of us would have been able to stop it. Nick was different after that night. I felt it the second I saw him the next morning. He walked into the kitchen like he always did, but something was off. His shoulders were tense. His steps, careful, measured. Like he was suddenly hyper-aware of the space between us. Like he was afraid to get too close. Morning, I said, keeping my voice light, normal. Pretending. He barely nodded. Not a glance. Not a smile. Just a quick reach for a coffee mug before turning his back to me. I stared at him, waiting for something, anything, that would tell me I imagined last night. That it was nothing. That he didn't feel what I know he felt. But he didn't look at me. Didn't say another word. And suddenly, I felt something I had no right to feel. I felt rejected. It was ridiculous. Irrational. I had no claim to him, no right to expect anything different. And yet, I felt like I had lost something. Something I never even had. I should have been relieved. This is what I wanted, wasn't it? Distance. Space. A chance to erase what had almost happened before it became something worse. But it didn't feel like a relief. It felt like punishment. The days passed and Nick barely spoke to me. If we were in the same room, he made sure there was always a safe distance between us. If I asked him a question, his answers were clipped, short. If I laughed, he didn't. If I looked at him too long, he turned away. And it ate at me. The way he used to talk to me, the way he used to see me, it was gone. Like I had ruined something. Like I had crossed a line in a way I didn't even understand. At night, lying in bed beside Tom's motionless body, I replayed that moment over and over again. The heat of the air between us. The way he had looked at me. The way he ran. And with every replay, the shame inside me grew. What have I done? I told myself it was for the best. That he was just trying to forget it, to move on. That I should be grateful he was doing what I should have done from the beginning. But it still hurt. Because I missed him. Not in the way I should. Not as a stepson. Not as the boy I helped raise. I missed the way he made me feel. And I hated myself for it. It wasn't just me who felt the shift. Tom noticed too. It happened one night, days after the storm, as I was cleaning up the kitchen. He was standing at the counter, pouring himself a drink. Casual. Unbothered. Then, out of nowhere. "What's going on with Nick?" My stomach dropped. I froze, gripping the edge of the sink, my fingers pressing into the cool metal as I forced my voice to stay steady. "What do you mean?" "I don't know. He's acting weird. Barely talks to me. Barely talks to you either." The air felt too tight. I turned, forcing a confused expression, hoping he couldn't see the way my hands trembled. "Maybe he's just stressed with school," I said, too quickly. "You know how he is." Tom shrugged, taking a sip of his drink, his face unreadable. "Yeah, maybe." But I could feel it. That thing. That awareness. He was looking at me differently. Not suspicion, not yet. But something else. A small, flickering doubt. And suddenly, I felt like I couldn't breathe. I had spent so much time obsessing over Nick's distance, over my own guilt, that I hadn't stopped to think, what if someone else noticed? What if I wasn't the only one who felt the shift in the air? Because something had changed. And Tom could sense it. He just didn't know why. Not yet. But how much longer until he did? That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Nick's face. The way he avoided me. The way he ran. The way Tom's gaze lingered just a second too long. I felt like I was standing on a cliff's edge, my toes curled over the precipice, the ground beneath me crumbling a little more each day. One wrong move. One wrong word. And everything would fall apart. I needed to fix this. I needed to fix myself. But the problem was, I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Because no matter how much I tried to push it away, a part of me still wanted him to look at me the way he had that night. A part of me still wanted the tension back. A part of me still wanted something I had no right to want. And that was the real betrayal. I don't know how long I stood there that night, staring at myself in the mirror. The bathroom light was dim, casting a soft glow over my face, but it didn't hide the exhaustion in my eyes. I looked older, tired, and not just from lack of sleep. From everything. From the way my thoughts had been consuming me, twisting into something unrecognizable. From the way I had let myself slip into a version of me I never thought I'd become. I touched my reflection, fingertips grazing the cool glass, as if trying to reach through, trying to find the woman I used to be. What have I done? My voice was barely above a whisper, but the words echoed in my head like a scream. Because I knew. I knew what I had almost done. Even if nothing had happened, even if no lines had been physically crossed, I had wanted it. And that was enough. That was worse. Because it meant something inside me had already broken. It meant my heart had betrayed me long before my body ever could. I squeezed my eyes shut, gripping the sink so tightly my knuckles turned white. This isn't me. This can't be me. But the truth was, it was me. I had let loneliness take hold of me so deeply, so quietly, that I didn't even notice when it started shaping me into someone else. Someone desperate. Someone reckless. Someone who blurred lines she never thought she would. And I hated it. I hated myself. It was never about Nick. That was the worst part. The most humiliating part. It was never about him, his kindness, his attention, the way he looked at me. It was about me. It was about the hollow, aching space inside me that had been there for years. It was about the nights I lay in bed beside a man who didn't care if I was awake or asleep, who hadn't touched me in ways that made me feel wanted in so long I had forgotten what it felt like. It was about how invisible I had become in my own home. And Nick. Nick had simply been the first person to see me again. And I had mistaken that for something else. I had twisted it into something ugly. Something dangerous. I had almost ruined him. And in the process, I had almost ruined myself. I pressed my forehead against the mirror, exhaling shakily, trying to steady the chaos in my mind. I need to fix this. I need to stop this before it gets worse. But how? How do you erase something that's already been felt? How do you undo something that's already changed you? And worse, did I really want to? Because as much as I hated myself for what I had done, for what I had almost done, there was still a part of me that missed it. That missed the way his eyes lingered just a little too long. That missed the feeling of being wanted, of being noticed. And that part of me, that small, desperate part of me, terrified me the most. I don't know if I'll ever forgive myself for the thoughts I had, for the lines I let blur, for almost ruining someone who never should have been caught in my storm. But I need to know, am I alone in this? Have you ever felt so lonely that it made you question everything? That it made you do, or almost do, something you never thought you were capable of? Have you ever craved something so much, not because it was right, but because it made you feel alive again? Tell me in the comments. I need to know I'm not the only one. And tell me, what would you have done in my place? Should I tell Tom? Should I confess to Nick, to explain, to apologize? Or would that only make it worse? I don't know if there's a right answer anymore. But maybe you do. And if you love real, shocking infidelity stories, the kind that no one talks about but everyone feels, subscribe to Shocking Infidelity Saga and hit that like button. Because some stories, they need to be told. Even the ones we're ashamed of. I've learned something in all of this. Something I wish I had known before. Loneliness is dangerous. It sneaks up on you. It changes you. It makes you see things that aren't really there. It makes you believe in connections that might not exist. It makes you crave warmth in places you should never look for it. And if you let it consume you, it will push you toward decisions that can destroy lives. I was lucky, because I stopped myself before it was too late. But not everyone does. So if you're listening to this, if you feel invisible in your own life, fix it now. Before you wake up one day and realize you've already done something you can never take back. Because I almost did. And this wasn't the last time something like this happened. But that's a story for another day.